I have a feeling that that's like when Paul said, fight for the unity. I don't think unity was like, make sure you guys all believe the same thing doctrinally.
Mm-hmm.
The unity was because everybody was dying for the
Yeah.
story at that point. So suffering really produces a depth of intimacy between people that I don't think anything does.
Well, welcome to another Gray Pages, and here with Hugh and Taylor. It's been a little bit since we've recorded an episode, and there's been some let's say some events. Hugh's been kind of in it with the family. I don't know exactly how to frame this other than to invite you guys to maybe share a little bit to frame this conversation, and we'll dive in.
Yeah, it feels a little awkward to make this about like personal stuff, but in Brave Cities, it's pretty much always a personal
It is.
something's going on, usually with us or our people. And we we've talked a lot more about spiritual warfare, like in the Brave City world, like it's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I've
Might be real.
always said that I don't know if Satan and his minions need to even wake up to keep us from going to church services, but when we actually establish new beachheads of the gospel, I think it wakes up the underbelly. And I don't, you never know if what you're going through personally is that, but yeah, we had a situation, it's probably almost been 4 weeks now, where my daughter McKenna, and if people maybe don't know the story, our two adult daughters and their husbands all moved out here to Alton with us. So it was kind of a family on mission decision that we all made together. So after a life of them watching us do tangible kingdom stuff, they actually, I was like the holdout, but both girls and the in-laws, the boys, they wanted to come, and then I slowly kind of came around. But and over the years, we always felt like if there was ever any attack on the Halters, it was always to my oldest daughter, Allie. She seemed like the easy one to just, it would disrupt our entire world when she was disrupted. McKenna was always a little bit of our stability. Nothing really ever went wrong with her. She just always had a clear attitude towards things. And so, anyway, about 4 weeks ago, she was pregnant, probably about 5.5 months pregnant with their second. They have a 2-year-old son. And she just had a seizure out of nowhere. So they rushed her to the hospital. And essentially what had happened is she was bleeding out. She had, the placenta had pulled away from the uterus. So she had been for a couple of days bleeding out. Nobody knew it till she had a seizure. So when we got to the Alton Memorial Hospital, they did not have enough blood to keep pumping in her to keep her alive. So they rushed her off to a St. Louis hospital, but had a moment with McKenna in the ambulance, where it was like, I definitely felt like I was saying goodbye to her. She remembers it as the only thing she remembers. And so we had a little daddy daughter moment that was probably the most powerful moment I've had so far with my kids. And then her kidney shut down, and she had some blood disease we didn't know about that was brought on by this trauma. So they could not get blood to clot. So they're just pumping her full of, gallons of blood, and it just wasn't doing anything. So first 3 days, I don't think anybody in our community had a lot of hope. We were into the miracle range, people praying all over the world. But we're on, she just came into the coffee shop about an hour ago. She did 2 weeks of dialysis, and she's blood is normal. Kidneys seem to be fully functioning. So looks like we have staved off this. She did lose the baby though. So had kind of a cool time this last Sunday with our community, John. Taylor gave us a little time of worship and reflection. People shared kind of what that experience had done to them as part of our family and community. And we put JoJo's ashes next to my son's ashes under the old big pine tree. John, you know where that big, huge pine tree is behind the pool. So
Yep.
we had a little family, burial time memorial for JoJo. And yeah, but there's a lot of deep talks between Taylor and I during that time, between a lot of our community members, some joking that it all happened the day after we launched the Righteous Brood book. So there was those weird thoughts like, well, are we getting hassled? And I was telling everybody, I don't even think the book's that good enough to warrant this type of, but that's always the questions you go like, are we taking another hit because of something that's being established? Or so anyway, so that's the backdrop of it. But we thought we would just maybe talk about suffering a little bit and the power of that in community. And maybe we'll get into some spiritual warfare, trying to discern what something is. But Taylor, you have any thoughts just to help kind of frame today a little bit?
Yeah, sure, John. I think some of this can ignite you as well, but obviously, we don't have to cover the reality that we live in a culture, and we're kind of conditioned by a culture that teaches us to avoid pain at all costs. I would even say it's maybe a natural tendency in humans. I don't know that for sure, but it seems pretty natural to avoid pain. But I think that the best framework for what we've been meditating a lot on, and maybe if this was a gray page, would be if we're not fighting externally, we're going to fight internally. I think we're made to fight. So where that kind of paradigm and that philosophy lands in communal life and kingdom development, kingdom architecture, unity, covenant, probably two of the most important things to me as a community builder, unity and covenant. How all that ties in, I think, is super important. So one of the ideas that I've been mulling over a lot is so you have those who are counted worthy to share in the sufferings of Christ, and we rejoice in that, is what the scripture says. But how that suffering unifies a community. It's rare that whether it's in like a marriage relationship or a work environment, like let's say you're in a startup time of your business. In that startup time, you're rarely going to be stressed out by all the peripheral things that tend to stress you out once you're stable and once you're making money, because you're grinding, you're fighting for something so external. In your marriage, relationships, whatever, when you're going through some serious external pain, meaning a child is suffering or your spouse is suffering, things like that, that can usually galvanize and catalyze unity in like this external fight. But then I think I would say what we're talking about today is how all that kind of galvanizes and unifies a community, a faith community, an order of workers that are thinking about something bigger than themselves. And again, I'll just kind of bookend with what I started with is I think we're made to fight. It's pretty obvious if you get on any social media platform that people's favorite thing to do is fight. And if we don't have a noble and really like a personal external fight, then I think it's inevitable that we will end up fighting internally. And that's, of course, an oversimplification. Like, we're going to fight internally regardless. We're selfish. We're greedy. We're needy. We're insecure. But in particular, this moment, like many in our community here in Alton and others I've been a part of, it's just been so clear, man. Like everybody's fighting for something bigger than themselves, not just McKenna's life, but like the life of our people, the life of the work. You know, there were moments where we looked each other in the eye and we were like, man, if this goes south, we might all kind of need to hang it up for a couple of years and just, you know, go on cruises or something, because we might not have the game with this kind of pain or this kind of tragedy coming. But ultimately, I think it would have, no matter what happened, it would have galvanized us. So yeah, that's the conversation today: is how does pain and suffering unify us as a people?
And I'll throw this in. I think when you really think about what a brave city would do in a city, right? Out of, you know, like people will come and they will check out what we're doing and they'll drive home amped about a coffee shop or a bike shop and it's about 100 miles away from the actual power source of what will really happen. Like if your community is really going to change, you know, if our deal is going to change Alton, it's so crystal clear. The thing that people are impressed with is not the coffee shop or the building. People are impressed with our people. So there's a depth. So as you're building a brave city, the biggest thing, it's actually in one of our chapters, the very first thing that God builds is people, disciples. And it's the quality of a disciple that actually carries most of the weight. So I mean, I was just in here the last 2 hours and McKenna comes in. So Taylor, you know, Roger and, you know, a lot of other people in here, and they just all go right to McKenna and they're around our family and they're all expressing how much they were in agony. And these are not believers. These are folks that just know our family and know our community. And so there, you know, it's almost like we'd say that you can build the coolest stuff, but if your people are not being built, and let's just say suffering is the primary means by which we grow, then it should be a point, you know, like I think Jesus talked about a good person that's about to start something is like a construction worker that counts the cost. So to me, the cost everybody should be really counting right at the beginning of building a brave city is not the toll that the businesses may have on you or whatever, but it's you're essentially standing up going, hey, Satan, or hey, God, because God sometimes gives permission for us to get sifted, right? And there's something about his glory in that. And I hate that idea of sifting, like Satan going, hey, I'd like to take a run at him. And Jesus goes, go ahead. Yeah. And then, so whatever we're going through, you know, so I think it's a gut check for before you start, know that if you really want to grow, like even like watching our people, and it wasn't just through McKenna, our people have been growing a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, mostly because they all live within about a mile. They help each other with their kids who are always sick. There's been a constant like stream of suffering. They've just been struggling. They're all young families with lots of young kids and nothing's easy. And so by the time the McKenna thing came around, I actually, you know, I thought if she had not made it, I might have been bye-bye for 6 months. Taylor might have went with me, but I have a feeling the rest of them would have made it. So I don't know. There's something that's been developed over this long course of suffering together. So I don't know. It might be the most important thing to building a brave city is persecution or travail, struggle.
You know, as you were talking about like the building not being the thing that people are impressed with, but the people, what came to mind is this, you know, I was thinking about this from like 1 Peter 2, but like the whole like that whole living stone thing, like a bit like something like I lay a stone in Zion, precious cornerstone, and the idea that people are the stones. And you know, like as we think about like the kingdom city and the presence of the kingdom, the thing that is being built is this kingdom reality that isn't buildings or found in buildings or the cool coffee shop or the church as we've known it or any of those things. And yet it is the people, the body, the community. And, in that same passage, they echo the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, which is this kind of reference, right, to Jesus. But I also think that for us, is like what Taylor was saying before, like our culture has taught us to look away from or stay away from pain at all costs, suffering at all costs. Even our churches are set up to in some way to give us like safety and security and certainty. I mean, even the idea, like, as you were talking about, like Jesus going, yeah, like take a run at them. Like at some level, this reality that like that fairy tale God that would never let you bump your knee is not real and is actually a fairy tale and is something that needs to die. Right. And at some level, we also are rejecting the thing that, because I know for me, and I guess put this back to you as a question, and I don't know, maybe it's too recent to really know this. And I always wonder, like, when's it okay to look at this? But like my car accident, for example, a long time ago, I could say for certain that is the most suffering and pain that I've ever been through. I smashed my whole face, like couldn't walk, couldn't breathe on my own for some time, took forever. And for me, it was like God let this happen to me. If God is real, it's a place to point my middle fingers for like a long, long time. But I would say today, that's the best thing that has ever happened to me. Yeah. And it's strange that some of the worst things that have ever happened, and I think this is true for so many people, if you like survey your life and go, those hardest places of suffering, because at some level, they like shake all of the day-to-day concerns off. Like, I don't care what I smell like. I don't care like how my diet's doing. I don't care what you think of me. All these things that like plague us all the time, just like we sober up from them in the face of suffering. And I guess I don't know, to put it back to you as a question, like about the, like, cause you're like, as you said, like these kingdom cities, these brave cities, like at some level, there's a core building block that is the place of suffering. And I couldn't help but think of this passage to be like, the cornerstone that these things are built on is actually the thing that builders reject. And if you're going to be a builder that's going to build something kingdom, you can't reject this cornerstone.
And what the rejectionable part of Jesus was that he was a suffering servant.
Exactly that, right? That the Christ
so
is
we
crucified.
who are being built into around his cornerstone.
Exactly.
It would make perfect sense if he's the suffering servant, we are the suffering followers.
Yep.
So the one question I had one guy ask, he said, well, if suffering is so important to building the community, you can't just make the stuff up and go, hey, next Tuesday at 3:00, I think we'll start suffering.
Yep.
Someone just hit Taylor in the kneecap.
But in
with
some
a
ways,
hammer.
you can, so you'll have these
Yeah.
Sort of out of left field or sicknesses or whatever will befall people in your community.
Yeah.
But you also have the invitation every day to go into suffering. That's the point.
That's
of
exactly right.
But we go to where Jesus is, and Jesus is always with the suffering. So yeah, you can suffer next week at Tuesday at 2:30. You just have to decide to dive in and begin to carry some weight and lift some things that are heavy and hard.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think the comparison of suffering is nonsense. I think it's nothing that any kind of kind father would ever project on his kiddos. I think the idea that we've said before, if you're not having fun, you're not going to make it, prevails still. Like we want to have a blast doing this for 5, 6, 7 decades or more as a community until the Lord says, all right, it's time to wrap this one up and do it somewhere else. But in that pursuit of party, joy, laughter, togetherness, we just receive the suffering as it comes. We're not masochists. We're not out there trying to perpetuate suffering on ourselves. Yeah. But whatever season that we're in, which we have been through, it's been up and down, but I just feel like suffering has been kind of consistent. At least since we've lived here. And that's what I mean by who is counted worthy right now, like McKenna and then of course, secondarily the Halter family. But McKenna, as a whole was really the one in this, in the context of this conversation, that was said, hey, you carry the suffering right now. And then your community's going to come around you, your city's going to come around you, and your city, you know, the seekers or whoever is going, they're going to see the unity and the faithfulness of a community, or the brokenness, I think, can be just as helpful to see us just fall apart, but fall apart together. The city's going to see that, and they're going to flock to that too. So yeah, I think everything remains the same. You know, we keep pursuing the things that sustain us. I do not want to live a life where I'm constantly being bombarded with suffering. In fact, I want to live a life where I'm always surrounded by laughter, and by like enjoyable pursuits. I think suffering seems to be more of, because it's maybe try to jump in and like take this thought, but it's not even an eternal reality. Like suffering will end, so it can't be something that we just long for. I think it's something we receive.
You know what? Let me jump in with a response to that.
Yeah.
I think you're right, but there's these stories that have always stood out to me in scripture, especially like throughout Revelation. But like, so for example, in Revelation, it says like, behold the lamb that is slain, that looks as though he's been slaughtered or has been slaughtered, right? And then the resurrected Jesus says like, here, put your finger in these wounds. And what's interesting is like, while I affirm what you're saying, like the suffering ends, this seems to be indicated in the picture, the wounds are eternal. The wounds remain forever. And so what that tells me then is somehow the wounds are converted into the wellspring of grace and joy and love and laughter. That they become, literally, the slaughtered lamb is the centerpiece of the image of the kingdom. Like
right.
The ultimate victim of the ultimate crime is the centerpiece of the eternal presence of joy. And so I go, yeah, the wounds do seem eternal. And Hugh, we briefly were on a call the other day, and you kind of made a comment to me like, man, this has been, I don't know exactly how you said it, but like I heard like this has been hard and dark, and yet at the same time I have so many, it's been so revelatory. Like I can't wait to share some of like what I've discovered here. And it resonated with me because of time I've spent in the dark, you know, and I went, oh, I can only imagine. And I guess would invite, like, I don't know if there's things you feel like you can share, if any of that's even, you're even able to articulate, but like, I am super curious to hear, like,
Well,
yeah, where you been?
I'll bring up a couple.
Good.
One biggie is related to my posture towards mission my whole life. Because I've generally been pretty good at suffering myself. You know, it was Ryan's whole life of 10 seizures a day, no sleep. You know, I mean, so every day was terrible. And like Cheryl and I used to not, people go, hey, why don't you guys go out for dinner? We'll watch Ryan. And I would say, no, you know, because I didn't want that pain to be upon them. So I denied Cheryl and I hundreds of nice date nights because I didn't want somebody else to pick up some of that weight we were carrying. When we were planting churches, I remember trying to talk people out of coming with us because I didn't want them to feel any pain. I'm like, just go drop your kids off at the mega church and just like enjoy your life. Like, don't, because I knew what planting did to families and what their kids were. And so my whole life has been to try to carry suffering myself. And only like, yeah, the McCalls can come because I knew the McCalls knew suffering. So I wasn't going to worry about them. So every once in a while you have people that come into your life, you go, nah, they know how to carry it. But as a rule, like I made a comment to, you know, David, our coffee guy, and Justin and Natalie, who are our other managers. We were sitting in the roastery kind of in the middle of this. So it wasn't clear at this point that McKenna was going to make it. And they were just going, well, how are you doing? And one of the things I brought up was that I'm feeling pain for the community, even more than pain for Cheryl and I right now, or McKenna, like I didn't want anybody to be sad. And I made the comment, I said, I just hope that there's a season when this is all over. And I said, I want a season where none of your kids are sick every week, and we can actually just like enjoy the sunshine together. And I thought it was a nice request, and I'd still would ask the Lord for that. But David goes, no, we're not going to ever have those. But he almost was like he was setting his jaw towards Rome, going, no, this is what we do as a community. And that was a revelation to me. I got to quit worrying about trying to keep people from pain, and just recognize how much it grows people. So that was a bit of a community revelation for me. Also, just one with me and my wife, we're at that stage of life where it's all different. We're just grandparents now. And sometimes you get the feeling as you get older, your jobs are just to care for everybody. And going through this many years of suffering with Cheryl, it helped me to understand intimacy more, that there's lots of things that can be intimate between couples, eye contact or sex or whatever it is. But I recognized in the suffering moments, I felt closer and I desired Cheryl more than I ever have. And I have a feeling that that's like when Paul said, fight for the unity. I don't think unity was like, make sure you guys all believe the same thing doctrinally. The unity was because everybody was dying for the story at that point. So suffering really produces a depth of intimacy between people that I don't think anything does.
Right. That's right.
So, and I think now the scripture that says take joy in your sufferings, I actually kind of get it now. Like that was I'd say first time the joy thing for me all these years. I'm 56. The joy part never made sense. Endure suffering, I get it. See the benefit of it, I get it. But take joy, I never got that. Now I get it a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that says to our people that are thinking about doing stuff that we're doing, but it does say like you don't want it to be easy for people because they won't become amazing people that your town's going to look to someday.
Right.
And the witness of how our community suffered through our son's death and then this situation, because our daughters were like mom and dad, a lot of their friends are not believers. We're not in a little Christian bubble here. Obviously, the amount of witness that went out through social media or whatever, it's hundreds of people that don't know anything about the Lord that get to watch the sufferings of our community. So I just go like, you can try to sit on the street corner and see how many people, randos you can talk to about the Lord, but it's way faster if you just take it in the ass and handle it really well as a community. That will what you're the letter that's read by everybody.
Y'all know the quote, Lewis, I think something about comfort knits a man's heart to the world. Prosperity, comfort knits a man's heart to the world. Anyway, it goes on. He says something like that, but I know this part. He says when he thinks he is finding his place in it, it is in fact finding its place in him. And I think, and how are we supposed to stay? And I think it was Lewis also that talked about that wartime mentality. Like how do we stay kind of committed to the teachings of Jesus? And because it's not about discipline, I don't think. I think it's about passion more than that, more than anything else. Maybe it's both, but I would say primarily it's like passion, risk, want. And so if comfort knits a man's heart to the world, then why am I going to want to build a better world? If comfort knits a man's heart to a city, then why am I going to want to build a better city? And again, I think we all have our kind of thresholds of pain and suffering. And this is why I think about it. This is a really cool thought to me. This is why community life, interconnected community life, community movement is so important, because no single person is Jesus in a community should carry the bulk of the suffering. I would say, Hugh, you know, kind of tongue in cheek, but just for fun, like, your desire to carry all the suffering was actually could actually be so detrimental to the unity of a community and the maturity of a community. It's not good for us or for anyone to say, well, this person carries most of the suffering, and then we'll carry the other stuff. Now we gotta share that burden, and then bear each other's. When it's my time to suffer,
Well,
I take it on.
especially if we're saying things like suffering is the primary means by which we grow. If that's a real conviction, then to say,
absolutely, there's no question that that's true. But I also don't think that it has to be personal. Like, I don't think it has to be my suffering.
Right.
David can be suffering, and then I grow through his suffering. And so you got to think about it practically. Like, if we just have this conversation philosophically, there really is kind of nowhere to go. It's like, well, I'm not going to pursue suffering. That's almost completely unnatural. You're kind of off your rocker if you do that. I'm not going to sit in it and love it. Maybe ever. I might go, I rejoice in what God is doing, but I don't know that practically ever I'm going to just sit in suffering and love it. So practically, how can we look at this as a movemental conversation, as a kingdom ecosystem conversation? And I think it has to be a shared agreement, like a shared covenant, that we are going to embrace suffering. When it's your time, we're going to bear your burdens. When it's my time, all I'm asking y'all to do is jump in and bear it with me.
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't think it does, now looking back on another season of suffering, to go back to the questions and go, well, was this God? Was it Satan? Was it sifting? Was it persecution? You realize none of those questions are even helpful. It doesn't matter how it comes or why you're in it. There might be a point of wisdom where you go, well, I brought this one on myself, and so maybe I'll smarten up next time, every once in a while. But the issue is what is God doing in us and in our community? And if we're not carrying the suffering of somebody else, maybe that's a little bit of a practical point.
Yeah.
Like, are you just going to start a coffee shop, or like, what are you going to suffer for besides that type of thing? So I think those are maybe some, what I would coach somebody: don't overthink it. Don't try to figure it out. If it's real enough, you're going to pray real prayers.
Yeah.
I can't help you like try to pre-pray pain away, which some people would do. They just want to make sure we're all covered. God, please protect us from, anything bad. The only thing Jesus prayed was that, not that I would have them taken out of the world, but you protect them from the evil. So there is a protective prayer, but it doesn't mean protection from pain.
Right.
Probably a protection against the sovereign plan of God,
Yeah.
If Jesus was praying for all the disciples protection and they all got taken out, then did Jesus get like no answers from dad, or like I don't think we can assume that. So he wasn't saying, God, please help them not to die physical deaths. But there was, so what is protection? What does he really want for our people? Probably that they would stay faithful, and persevere and make it to the end of their story in the bigger story.
They say when you're going through hell, keep going. I've always liked that. What's that?
It's a country song, bro.
Is it a country song?
Not scripture, bro. Not Hebrews.
No, it's not. When Taylor was talking before and using the I love that, finding a place in the world, it's finding its place in you, and like the kind of comfort. But then, and I'm sure this, but you said, I think it's passion, risk, want, but that, and we use passion correctly, like this thing that you're like driven to or whatever, but like there's also a reason that like the passion of Christ was called the passion of Christ. Like it's passion actually means to suffer, right? It means suffering. And actually the things that we're passionate about typically are it's right that it's like that's the thing we're willing to suffer for, right? That we begin to live our lives when we find the thing we're willing to die for, that we're willing to suffer for. And what's really been fascinating, you guys know I geek out on like etymology stuff, and like that same word to suffer, you ever see like translations like suffer the little children come unto me, and it's like that's such a weird like turn of phrase, but like passion as in suffering and passivity as in to allow is actually like the same at some level. Like it's the same root word. And so what's interesting is, you know, I keep thinking about like, I don't know, like Hugh referenced before, like, well, you can go make all these, like preach to every dude on the street about this, that, or that. There's all these like things that we're like super not passive about. We're like, we're going to build our little empires. We're going to build our little kingdoms. We're going to build our little things. And we're not saying don't be builders, right? We're saying quite that. I was like, no, there's a lot to be built, but also recognizing like we don't, like we've talked about, we don't build the kingdom, right? There's a way in which it passes through us. It passes through the work as we do this work, and it's allowed by the way the table is set, it's allowed to be present, just as suffering is like allowed to be present. And I just like all of this seemed to like thread together in a really interesting way to me. And I started thinking about like suffering. This is a way to say this, and I'm sure this will resonate. Like suffering isn't a thing, like you were talking about allowing it or seeking it out or whatever. Suffering is not actually a thing that happens in your world. Suffering is a thing that happens to your world. Suffering is to have your world shattered. Suffering is an apocalypse, right? Which unveils some things, like apocalypse means to see some things, but in a very real way, it is an encounter with a power greater than yourself. Like it takes you to your knees. It overcomes you, right? And I know as you kind of walked through this, you go, no, that's exactly right. It has its way with you. It is a power greater than yourself. Like you allow it, but you suffer it. It's actually the same thing in a way. And I just, anyway, I want to put that to you as like this idea of like it is an encounter with a power greater than yourself, and just want to let you to like respond to that reality a bit, but also to chew on this like connection between passivity and passion and suffering.
I'm sorry. That was actually fantastic. But all I was thinking about was a moment where I had come to the end of my physical. I actually pooed my pants.
Correct. Yes.
My body just went, and I just sat there going, wow, I haven't done that for 30 years. It's just like, yeah, you completely lose all your ability to like controlling it. And then I was out in the field, snot flying everywhere, just begging God for, so yeah, good moments.
That's the true manifestation of suffering right there.
You gotta poo yourself.
Yeah, man. I mean, I guess I don't know if it's perfectly tied, but I can't stop thinking about how many people were praying, because prayer is a trippy thing to me. It's always been an interesting dynamic, my entire faith journey.
Yeah.
Vertical prayer does not come natural to me. Like meditative, like I'm going to sit in the presence of the Lord and talk to him. I feel, we could talk about prayer one day too, but I feel far more interactive most every day, and just kind of walking with God and having conversations, whatever. In moments like this, like true suffering. And I'll tell you another thing, man, I don't really love asking people to pray. I don't know what that is. That's probably something internal, like pride, or I don't know, but I don't really love going, hey, can you pray for my aunt? Her toe is sprained. Hey, can you pray for my family? We're struggling financially. Because I feel like a lot of times that's just saying, can you help me out with a little money? But man, when this McKenna stuff was going on, and I could tell you 4 other situations, but this one's so present. I know I took 2 trips during her time, and people I had never met before. I'm saying, hey, can we just stop everything we're doing and pray for this friend of mine? Her name's McKenna Riley, and I had people, in 2 different states on the West Coast and the East Coast praying for her. Not only that, but I know people who aren't necessarily prayer warriors who were praying through the night. We would get a text updating us what's going on with McKenna, and people that aren't really natural kind of let's bow our heads and talk to God were on the floor weeping, praying for her. So you got to be out of your mind to think there's not some divine power and purpose in suffering. What it does to the human soul is hard to quantify.
Yep.
And I have had people say, well, what do you learn about prayer? Is it the amount of prayer? Well, no, we also lost a baby, so one died and one lived, I don't know if I know any more about prayer, but I do know that that the praying without ceasing, it was a reality. Couldn't make it a second and a half without. Cheryl kept noticing I just kept shaking my head, like because the thought was, it was just so in my brain. I just would all day long. Nothing came out. It was groanings, right? So it talks about the groanings. And yeah, I had a lot of friends like Taylor. They're not prayer people, but they were desperate for.
That's right.
And it's usually out of love, right? So they love the Halters. They just don't want anything bad to happen to the Halters, or they love McKenna. I don't know if I learned much more. I did have one vision one time during that of prayer, like little gremlins on my shoulder, and as people are praying, they're flying off, but more are jumping on, and prayers are. So I don't know if, when Jesus is teaching us different things about prayer, like the one where he says, keep knocking, finally annoy. I think sometimes there might be a reality that some of the things that we're fighting are not God's will. It's not, maybe it wasn't God's will that McKenna, cash it in. So maybe there is a real fight, and maybe the fight is so real, you have to have 942 people that are begging God. So, but there's nothing definitive in the lesson, put it that way. Because McKenna still had to bury a daughter, and, so, but I do know something happened in prayer for sure. And it was real prayer. It wasn't, half-assing it for sure.
Well, and the interesting, like listening to both of you kind of like process this kind of piece on prayer feels like, the real key thing that stands out to me is real desperation. Like I couldn't go 2 minutes without praying because, and where I'm not normally going, pray for my aunt's toe. I'm telling everyone to pray because I've actually, this is beyond us. Like, and I am in a place of real desperation and real relationship. So because of real relationship and real desperation, it's like, it reminds me of the cliche, like there's no atheists in foxholes, but it's like, that's actually the truth.
Right.
You want an active prayer life? Go to hell. Right? Like that's where you learn to pray.
And here's close with this, because this could take 5 to 15 minutes, but this is why, like, the elements, we talk about the elements of a brave city, the pillars that kind of hold it up. The idea of creating tables that give access to the suffering, to the hurting, because like we suffer in consequence. Some suffer as they breathe. Like we suffer in circumstance, probably was the better. Some just suffer, like their life is they suffer. When we build tables that create access for the oppressed, the suffering, the hurting, the outcast, now they become friends. They become more than a mission. They become a friend. They become a brother, a father. Lynn's is at the hospital, which she usually is with Milton. She's been there since 9:45 a.m. It's 2:27 p.m. here. The doctor, she's been texting with me. The doctor is asking her, what do you want to do? Should we cut his feet off? Do we
put him down? Put him down.
Do we kind of deem him to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, however long that will be? Do we look for, I mean, all these options? And Lynn's is like, that's your job, man. Like, I'm not cut out to make those decisions. But now, this is the reality of building tables for people who live a life of suffering, whether it's a daily relationship, whether it's kind of something you're interacting with all the time. So talk some about that, because I think, again, like we don't realize how Babylonian it is to build these silos of protection and safety and security, void of a life of suffering and void of those who suffer. And we wonder why we don't pray. We wonder why we're not desperate and why we're not passionate.
That's good.
I have an immediate thought. There's this, I think in Revelation again, Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And what's interesting to me about that image is that we're the ones on the locking side of the door, and he is the one on the outside knocking. And we can either open the door or not. We can welcome him in or not. And I think one of the things that stands out to me about suffering and what the tables that we set to invite those who suffer. So like, here's an image that I think will be familiar with most people, unless they live just out in the sticks. You're driving down the road and you come to a red light and there's a homeless man or someone begging, staring at you. And we avert our eyes, we keep our windows rolled up, and we don't look. Because and I just think of this, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And then I think of the Matthew 25, it said, I was hungry, I was sick, I was naked, and you what? You didn't even look over at me. I was on the corner, knocking on your window, on your car. You were right there, I could see you. And you wouldn't even look at me. And I think the reason for that is because we recognize that is suffering, that they are like a portal to hell, looking at them, making eye contact, recognizing the need. And it is the other, as in the capital O other, that we are afraid of. Like it is the unknown, the stranger at the door could bring pestilence into my life. And I don't want to let them in. No strangers, no foreigners, no poor people, no hurting people. Like, we do not want that in our home. And it's actually because we've built lives to avoid suffering at all costs, like where we started. And I actually do think that the suffering servant, the presence of suffering, the capital O other, the presence of God is standing at the door and knocking. But if you let him in, he'll come in and it says, I will eat with you and you will eat with me. And the guest that we welcome in becomes the host that welcomes us into kingdom as we like open our door to the stranger and to the other. And so as you open your table, your home, your life to the suffering Miltons or neighbors or hurting people around us, you actually do welcome in someone that can bring real suffering into your life, into your home, into your family. But what comes with that suffering is kingdom presence and grace and goodness. And the thing that all of us are on our knees praying in our churches, God, give us a wellspring of life. Give us. And actually, it's funny in Isaiah 58. If you spend yourself on behalf of the poor, then you will be like a well-watered garden. Then you will call and I'll be like, I'm right here. Then it's like, all of the if-then statement of that is like everything you're praying for is contingent on opening the door to the stranger, to the other, and to suffering.
Man, John just went, he preaching today. Like he's.
Yeah.
This is, well, interestingly,
I teed it up for you, man.
I'm obsessed with this topic. This is actually the topic because, like I said, I referenced my car accident earlier. Like that I have this deep conviction that the things that we're avoiding are the most important things. We avoid the poor, we avoid suffering, we avoid talking about the things that are our secrets, our sins, all of these things are the best things we have to encounter God or whatever. And something I've been thinking about for a really long time. So like, this is like pent up in terms of it, because I actually think it is like the most crucial conversation. Like when you're suffering, I can't say to you, oh, this is great news. I would never say that. But as soon as you emerge and go, holy shit, I want to say, wasn't that good medicine?
Yeah.
Wasn't that great? And it's not great. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
This
And
is
yet at
why,
the same time,
as a final practical coaching, this is why we've always said, when you're starting a mission, at least find some people you enjoy being around.
yeah.
Because you're essentially picking who you're going to go suffer with.
Yeah.
So, and you're all going to open up your table. So we're all just going to create or invite mess into our lives. So you at least better start with some people you like.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, like the people that we have in Alton, even on the worst moments, there are moments like there is a wink of the eye and there's a little bit, just enough levity to get through the second, and so don't start with people you don't like, because it's just, that'd be terrible. And let's call this session the secret sauce of kingdom building, and just put suffering next to it. Secret sauce of suffering.
Man.
Yeah, I think it's such a great conversation. So often, Hugh, I know you can attest to this because we've been in the room together a few times. We'll be having conversations and people will go, yeah, we got the mission and the community stuff down. We're just really struggling with like where the poor come into play. And it's like, oh, yeah, that was actually the only thing.
Or they're going, man, there's some people that are really mad at us for leaving the church and they're being mean to us. And like, they're thinking about like cashing it in. I'm like, no, like that's 101, like people hating you, 101.
Yeah.
Well, killing your body was like 401 level, but even then it says, don't worry about those that are killing your body.
About those. Yeah.
So, but people will be starting Brave Cities at 101. Their in-laws are mad at them for moving to another town or working with the poor. So, but keep it in perspective.
That's true. That's true.
All right.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you for sharing, man. I know y'all been through it, and I'm just grateful for you being willing to talk about it. Yeah, it's important. Thank you.
Pleasure. And when you're ever wondering what you can just do to make it through the last moment, the only thing that worked for me was a bath with a little bourbon and some comedy on my iPhone YouTube.
If you have
some Maniscalco.
No, I went Bill Burr.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
so okay, here's what I know, because so
was this before or after you pooped your pants?
That was it. Well, it was part of that process of cleanup. Yeah.
So you realize, okay, as you just shared that, I thought, and you said Maniscalco, who's hilarious, by the way, but I thought, man, I really hope the comedian's name starts with a B.
Yeah.
And it's Bill Burr. And I think a better title than your title is Baths, Bourbon, and Burr.
That's
good. No, do the whole name.
You got it.
Baths, Bourbon, and Bill Burr.
See you next week.